All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I always love coming to these calls because I learn a ton. So thanks to everybody who's presenting here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about SharePoint Embedded, and I also have my teammate, Mark Windle, who is online today. So if you have questions as we go through this and you post them in the chat, you might see him jump in. I do want to point out that we are now in public preview. And if you've heard about products like repository as a service, or SharePoint repository services, or Syntex repository services, those were all kind of working titles for what we now have as our final name, SharePoint Embedded. And so I'm very excited today to give you an overview and an update on where we are with this. So I want to start off with a basic assumption, and this is our understanding as we talk to enterprises of all sizes around the world, is that content is really the lifeblood of every enterprise and every app. And by content here, I'm talking about, documents that you might make in an Office product or text files or PDFs or anything like that. And what happens is these files and documents end up moving around an organization in very interesting ways. And some of them stay in M365, but often what happens is they get uploaded and stored in some type of other system. And these other systems might be first-party systems that an enterprise has built for itself. Maybe they're a line of business app that actually handles some sort of proprietary process that they have to go through. Or maybe it's a third-party developed ISV app that's purchased and used by an organization. So maybe it's a sales management system or a marketing management system. And what happens is when these pieces of content, these files and documents get uploaded into these other systems, they end up getting put into repositories with a wide variety of capabilities. And so from a management standpoint, these fragmented and siloed systems end up creating a challenge, right? You end up with security and compliance challenges. You end up with differences around collaboration capabilities and a whole lot more. And so what we think is out there is an opportunity for a unified content platform for enterprises. And so the idea here is that any app that you would develop as part of your own enterprise line of business would store files and documents into the same layer as any app that you purchase from a third party, right? And so the idea is that all of these apps are storing the files and documents that matter to them inside a unified document layer. And you end up then with a very consistent collaboration capabilities, a consistent security footprint. You end up with very consistent content management capabilities, as well as all the emerging content AI features. And this is actually where SharePoint Embedded comes in. So SharePoint Embedded, it is an API-only, headless version of SharePoint specifically designed for apps. Now, it's designed to be used both by enterprises who are building those line of business apps and by ISVs who are building apps that they sell to other companies. Now, importantly, it actually creates a dedicated partition within your M365 tenant to store those files and documents. And within that dedicated partition, you end up with M365 collaboration, security and compliance. You have all the integrated content management and control that you're used to. Everything is content AI ready. It is all powered by consumptive APIs that are exist in the graph stack. And of course, everything comes with the M365 business continuity processes or business continuity promises. So if we take a little bit different look at this, what you can see is a kind of a layer cake diagram sitting up here on the screen. And at the foundation of everything is the Microsoft Cloud. That's the infrastructure that we're running on. And then in the middle, you have these two platforms. At the foundation of everything is the M365 security and compliance platform. On top of that, you have SharePoint Embedded. And then on top of that, you have the experiences. Now, on the experiences, you're going to notice that there's two separate sections up here, and this is actually really important. On the right-hand side, you'll see that we have a number of M365 experiences that are already today being built and delivered on top of this stack, right? And so things like Designer and Loop are already delivered using SharePoint Embedded as their file and document management system. So then you, as an enterprise building custom applications, or as an ISV building applications, you actually can build on the exact same stack that Microsoft does within M365. So I want to talk a little bit now about some of the features that this actually brings forward. Don't worry, I'm not going to read the whole slide, but broadly speaking, when we think about kind of the features that this enables for apps, it's these four big families of security, collaboration, core storage, and then of course, content AI. And our general mission is to make sure that if you have an M365 capability, we want to surface that as part of your use of SharePoint Embedded. So in the collaboration world, which I'll talk more about here in just a second, for example, you have really easy access to Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, both the web client and the desktop client, so that you can embed co-authoring and live presence and everything that means inside your custom app that you're building. Now, if we think about kind of the core innovation that's driving all this, it's all built around kind of the M365 tenant. And so already today, you have this notion of this M365 storage platform that goes across the whole tenant, and you have different partitions that use that storage platform differently. So for example, you have SharePoint, which behaves one way, and you have OneDrive that behaves another way. And what we're introducing is this ability to create a custom partition within that M365 storage platform. And that's really where SharePoint Embedded Containers comes in. Now, there is no user experience as part of the SharePoint Embedded Containers. These are something which you can only interact with via the API, and you always interact with it via the Graph API. So the good news is that if you're used to using Graph APIs to do things with files and drive IDs and all that kind of good stuff, all of your knowledge around that carries forward into SharePoint Embedded. Now, these embedded containers are actually really flexible. As I said before, they actually give you this dedicated SharePoint partition for your app. So when you start using SharePoint Embedded with your app, that section of M365 is dedicated and isolated for your app. There's some details around that I'll get to in a second. But the important thing to keep in mind is that your app has full control over the containers that are within there. So for example, if you need to instantiate a container or you need to garbage collect a container, all of that is something which your app can manage. Now, these containers end up also being a scale unit and security boundary. And so it really becomes an important part of your information architecture. And so if you have kind of a business construct, we'll talk a little bit later about one of these for one of our partners called Peppermint Technology. But if you have a business construct, which is actually what's organizing the files and documents, you can very easily instantiate a container for each one of those. And so maybe this is a client engagement, or maybe this is something around a year, some reason that you want to organize those files and folders as part of this. Of course, it's integrated with M365 Experiences. There is PowerShell support for a lot of the admin functionality. And then there's also management capability within the SharePoint Admin Center with RBAC and everything else that you're used to. So when you think about this dedicated storage, a good way to think about it is like this, right? You end up with your tenant boundary, and you have different apps using different stacks of containers. So for example, app 1 is using stack 1, app 2 is using stack 2, and app 3 is using stack 3 over here. And you can see that some of these are outside the M365 boundary, and some of them are inside the M365 boundary. The idea here is that when you have a whole bunch of apps, each of which has their dedicated space within the M365 storage area, that app controls all access into those different containers. So there is actually a robust and exciting permission model around this. And it's fun to say robust and exciting permission model. You can tell I've been in SharePoint embedded land here for a little while. But one of the things that we're doing is we're introducing this new permission scope and role and graph, right? So you have this file storage container.selected. This gives you the ability to set up app only and app plus user permission, and it grants access from an app into that particular set of containers. Now, because this is designed to be a flexible system, it's also possible for you to say multiple apps have access into a defined set of containers if that's your business need. But the whole idea is that it is very flexible and it's up to you to control. Now, we also have a number of permissions that are set up on the containers for both users and groups. So for example, at a container level, you can set up various roles like this reader, writer, manager, and owner, all of which have different rights within that container. Now, it's also possible for you to set up access at an individual file level within a particular container. And so maybe you have a container which Vesa owns, and then you want to grant access to a particular file or folder within that container to me. All of that works seamlessly out of the box. Now, if we look at some of the M365 experience integration, it's really interesting. You actually get to leverage a lot of this M365 user experience as part of your app. So this includes the full Office web and desktop support, co-authoring, collaboration, etc. One of the most exciting things is this ability to do app branding within the Office surfaces. So if you're an ISV and you are interested in trying to surface some of your ISV name and some of the logical container information so that customers can understand how things are organized, it's very easy for you to do that, right? That's part of how this works. Likewise, if you're an enterprise, that same information flows through. Now, there is some capability here around the M365 discovery and most recently used and all that kind of good stuff. And so that's a configurable option for you. So as you get into designing your app, you'll be able to decide exactly how you want to roll that out. And if you are interested in working with files and documents other than Office files, we actually have this thing called a one-up viewer, which helps you preview up to, I think it's 310 different file types that are out there. And so if you're using something like a PDF, for example, that's a very common one. You can embed that into your system. And then if you're working on some of the less commonly used formats that SharePoint supports, you'll be able to use those as part of your app as well. Now, on the security and compliance side, we have rich Microsoft Purview integration so that if you are at an enterprise who has invested in some of these advanced security and compliance capabilities, or if you're an ISV selling to enterprises who have invested in this capability, what you need to know is that those capabilities flow through to your SharePoint embedded powered apps. So, for example, if you need e-discovery, audit, and sensitivity labels, which are three of the most common things we see customers ask for, you can go ahead and count on the fact that those will surface for files that are managed within SharePoint embedded containers. Now, there's a bunch of other things that this supports. So things like data loss prevention, bring your own key, retention policy, multi-geo, and more. So the whole idea is that all these purview capabilities also flow through to files in SharePoint embedded. Now, we have been working on this for 18, 20 months, something like that, and we're working with a large number of partners around the world. And there are different sizes, different industries, because what our goal is to build a broadly applicable horizontal service for managing files and documents and apps. And it's been very helpful for us to get these requirements from a variety of different companies around the world. I want to take a little bit deeper dive into Peppermint real quick. And so Peppermint Connect is actually a app that helps law firms manage lawyers' workflow. And the whole idea is it's a unified M365 powered workflow that really does keep lawyers focused on the task at hand. And it is powered by SharePoint Embedded. And so you can see over here, for example, we have a lawyer who is working in a particular context. So they have this lease of Oak House that you're seeing in Teams. And they have this great selection of the most important documents related to that that's over here in the lower right-hand corner. All of that is powered by SharePoint Embedded. And likewise, they can surface this capability into Outlook. So they have a way of kind of dynamically understanding whether or not they need to create a new storage area. And so that's over here on the left. And then if you look over on the right, you'll see that we have this very consistent information and security architecture across clients, all powered by SharePoint Embedded. Now, I mentioned before that we are in public preview and it's very easy to get started. And I think we're going to have a walkthrough of this in detail next week. But you can enable SharePoint Embedded through the SharePoint Admin Center in any tenant, including developer tenants. We have content over on Learn that's designed to help you build your first apps. And of course, we have some self-paced learning modules as well. And actually, just I think last week or the week before, we announced our VS Code plugin that makes this super easy. So you can actually get up and running fast, easy, and free within about 10 minutes on using SharePoint Embedded using a developer tenant, so you can learn everything that it's all about. And that's about it. So thank you very much. And I look forward to kind of continuing this series. As Vesa mentioned before, we're going to have a number of these over the coming weeks with demos of core functionality. So thanks again.